Hey everybody, my name is Alex Musset, a developer advocate here at Dremio, and I want to welcome you to this interview with the author of the first book on Apache Arrow called In-Memory Analytics with Apache Arrow, author Matt Topol from Voltron Data and technical reviewer Jason Hughes from Dremio. Now let's discuss Apache Arrow, this exciting technology that is already disrupting the data engineering and analytics world. So welcome, guys.
Hey, thanks.
Now, first question I'd like to ask Matt, what is Apache Arrow?
Arrow refers to two things essentially. You have Apache Arrow the format, and you have Apache Arrow the project. In general, it's a in-memory runtime format for performing analytics, for data transfer. It's designed with the intention to be extremely performant and to enable high-speed, high-performant analytics based on a columnar in-memory format.
Got it. Amazing. Now, Jason, what problem was Arrow created to solve?
Yeah, so if we kind of look back in history a bit, and really what the problem was is that, columnar analytics had really just kind of started out and really had shown its value as far as like OLAP analytics compared to row-based execution. So really that started coming into the big data world in the early 2010s. And really what started happening is that all of these different projects wanted to start implementing and really doing columnar execution. But so as the community kind of got together and realized that, especially, Dremio, Jacques Nadeau, as well as Wes McKinney from Voltron Data now, they kind of realized like, hey, like, let's not all go reinvent the same wheel like 7 times. Can we just do this once and then we can all leverage this standard benefit? And that's really where the kind of impetus for the project came from. And then in addition to that kind of standardizing the format, as Matt mentioned, for processing for all these engines, it also became about that Wes was having this problem of shipping data between, Python and other processing engines, or at least languages. And so really shipping it between all the different formats for all of these different systems also made clear the problem of, having to serialize and deserialize the data in the different formats. So it kind of was the really goal of the project was really to solve both of those problems at the same time.
Matt, it sounds like Arrow benefits multiple different roles. How does Arrow benefit data analysts, data engineers, and data scientists?
So what ends up happening most is that for those types of roles, you're benefiting from Arrow in the tools that you use. So when you're data analysts or data scientists, you're going to be highly leveraging Arrow in, say, pandas or Spark, or the way that you manipulate your data, and you're benefiting from the performance, the lower memory usage, and things that Arrow enables. And then your data engineers, people who are building these tools, who are building these services, they can then leverage Arrow to improve in computational time, to make it easier to, you're going to benefit, because when you have many different systems that all want data and they're distributed, you're going to be constantly shipping data back and forth around, like Jason was just saying about the problem created to solve. When you're shipping this data from system to system, because Arrow, the project, has implementations in so many languages, you're going to benefit because you can use whatever language makes the most sense to you, and you're not tied to any one implementation, because the Arrow format in memory is identical regardless of what language you're in. So you can efficiently take the data from one service or process, send it to another one, and without the cost of serialization and deserialization. So the two big sides is you have the people who are going to be utilizing tools built that use Arrow, as in analysts and data scientists, and then you have people building tools, systems, projects, computational engines with Arrow, the engineers. And that's really where it benefits a lot of different things.
Awesome. Matt, how did you end up writing this book on Apache Arrow?
So it's actually funny. I gave a couple presentations at Dremio's subsurface conferences, talking about my work with Arrow with Go and some of my other work in how we were utilizing Arrow and Arrow Flight for shipping data. And Pact, the publisher, they actually reached out to me to ask if I would write a book, which I responded by going, "Wait, what?" Because I've never written a book before, and it was a very out of left field comment that I was not expecting. And I decided, you know what, I'll give it a shot and see how it goes. And they provide me a lot of support on the editorial side, and they engaged with technical reviewers and people like that. I leveraged my connection, my professional connection with Dremio to bring Dremio in and give a quick review on the book at the end, and to kind of help drum up hype and other notice and social media stuff with Dremio, with the book. And there it is. That's the story. It was really interesting. It was a great experience, and was surprisingly quicker than I was expecting. I only started writing the book last September.
Oh, wow. Okay. Awesomeness. Jason, how has the project's growth been?
Crazy in one word. Yeah, from Dremio co-creating it 7 years ago now. We've just seen a continual exponential growth. Like, it's just been crazy for that long. Like, even now, I just pulled the stats up, the usage data, and we've seen basically averaging triple year-over-year growth every year. So, I mean, that's just, as you can see, clearly exponential. So that's been really exciting from a usage perspective, as well as from an adoption perspective, as Matt was saying, around different ways you can use it. So certainly around like new tools that are coming out around analytics are really choosing to default to Apache Arrow, like not a custom format, not some other alternative. Like, they're defaulting to Arrow. Like, 3 projects that just came out, well, not necessarily just, but I've really picked up steam lately and really have become popular are around Google's Big Lake, which leverages Apache Arrow, Rise Labs Ray, which also leverages Arrow, as well as DuckDB, which also leverages Arrow. So, these new projects that are coming out are just defaulting to using Arrow and leveraging all of those benefits that Matt mentioned. And then on top of that, there's also not just new projects, but also existing projects, like projects that existed before Arrow existed. They're now coming back and saying, okay, no, we want to leverage all these benefits. So they're actually adopting some of putting Arrow into some of their stack. Like, for instance, like Apache Spark, Snowflake, and Athena. Amazon Athena are all leveraging Arrow. And those projects, at least 2 of them, I'm pretty sure all 3 of them, existed before Arrow did. So that's been pretty cool to see. That's
very cool. Jason, also, so the project has grown to include many subprojects. What are the subprojects Arrow Flight and Arrow Flight SQL for?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, with kind of the 2 halves of this is 2 sides of the coin, where you have, the processing, and you really want that in memory, like efficient processing regardless of language, but you also want to ship them between 2 different processes, languages, kernels, whatever. So really what Arrow Flight does is says, hey, okay, both of these services are talking Arrow, or at a minimal columnar structures. I don't need to actually transfer, I don't need to serialize the data to like a row-based format like ODBC or JDBC would when transferring it between 2 processes. And so what Arrow Flight says is basically, hey, I already have Arrow from where I have the data currently and to where I'm sending the data. Why would I change the format? Like, why would I serialize it? Just transfer it in normal Arrow buffers in the normal Arrow format with some additional, routing and things, that basically metadata about the buffers. And then just transfer it right over. And what we've seen is that really minimizing that serialization and deserialization can cut, process time, like overall job times for that transfer by 60 to even 90%, depending on really what you're doing. So that's been really exciting to see. And that's also kind of become a standard. Like I mentioned, Snowflake, for instance, started leveraging Arrow in their JDBC driver for some of those reasons. And the other side is, the Arrow Flight SQL is that with Arrow Flight, great, you get these benefits. And it's really for arbitrary data transfer, which is great. But one of the problems that it doesn't aim to solve is really around specifically database access. And so for things that you need to access a database, like, hey, like, what do I have? What are the data types for this table? right? Things like how do I execute an actual query, right? How do I do like prepared statements, right? Those kinds of things that database, just like normal database operations. And that's really where Aeroflite SQL comes in, providing those kinds of higher level constructs and really standardizing those constructs. Where before it would just be Aeroflite, you could do it in Aeroflite. Like if you sent a string Dremio, we just think you were talking about a string. So it would work, but it wasn't a standard. So you end up with that proliferation again. So really what we did is, really standardize on Aeroflite SQL, which is actually built on top of Aeroflite. So it leverages all of the Aeroflite stuff, but then also builds some stuff on top of it to really standardize that flow.
Very cool. And Matt, what is the Arrow subproject Gandiva for?
So Gandiva, whenever you're executing SQL statements and SQL queries, the most common thing to do in an engine like that is to essentially effectively compile or just parse the SQL and generate a tree and actually generate code on the fly that you then cache and then execute, so that you can then leverage that with subsequent queries and makes future queries faster and so on and so forth. Gandiva was actually contributed to the Arrow project by Dremio as something that they built out. Effectively, because Dremio is written in Java, they wanted to improve performance of the query executions. So utilizing JNI, the Java native interface, Gandiva is a C++ library that was designed to perform that sort of code compilation, that code generation for expressions. So you could build a expression tree, a case statement, or addition, multiplication, a whole tree to represent a single complex computation. And you build that using Gandiva, and what it does is it uses LLVM and actually generates the code on the fly that will perform that computation using Arrow record batches that you can then cache. And so whenever you want to execute it, you just get to execute code that was generated to perform that execution for the platform you're running it on, without having to custom compile all of these things beforehand. It just generates that compiled code using LLVM's libraries. And when Dremio tested this, they were seeing, 80, 90% performance improvements over just doing that entire code generation execution in pure Java. So when they contributed to the Arrow project, the community again got to leverage that. And so technically right now there's actually two computational things now with Arrow projects, because Arrow's got the computation engine, Acero, which is their C++ compute libraries. And then you have Gandiva, which provides just that expression compiling and code generation for performing these analytical operations. And in both cases, they're going to try to leverage technology like SIMD and benefit from processor architectures as much as possible. So both of these projects are still being worked on in various ways by members of the Arrow community.
Very, very cool. Now, Matt, what is the easiest way for someone to try out Apache Arrow?
I mean, it's going to depend a lot on what language you're working in and what works best for you. But the Arrow libraries exist in so many languages that, I would say probably one of the easiest ways to do it is using Python. You can just pip install PyArrow. And you can look at the documentation, you can play with it, and you can just, especially if you're a data scientist or data analyst and you're used to using, say, pandas, if you install PyArrow, Arrow has two pandas and from pandas functions that will quickly and efficiently and very easily convert a pandas data frame to an Arrow record batch or Arrow table. And that makes it really, really simple. You can also, spin up a a VM using Dremio's open source Docker image and try out Arrow Flight, in whatever language you want, Python, Go, C++, Java. You can take a client, execute a query, and retrieve it against a Dremio virtual machine from a Docker image, or just build a small server and client yourself. All those examples are actually examples that are provided in my book, which has a GitHub repo with all the code samples and snippets and things like that, which makes it for a really easy time for getting started and just trying it out. But you don't need my book to do that. You can just look at the Arrow documentation and try it out. All the major, whether you're working on Windows, Linux, Mac, all of them have quick startup distributed libraries that you can install and play with for whatever your preferred coding language really is.
Awesome. Although to everyone watching, I do recommend you buy the book.
Thank you.
Matt, where do you see the future of Arrow heading?
I mean, given the growth that Jason mentioned, tripling every year in the usage of it, I see Arrow taking over the date, like being the go-to lingua franca for data analytics and for data transport, because that's just what it's being used for. You have other projects that are planning on trying to leverage it. You have other projects like Substrate that's trying to do distributed, open a standardized execution plan format, and then you can take Arrow as your execution format. So you have your plan, you have your format, and you can easily just mix and match the pieces of your system together, and everything will just work because everyone's agreed on this format. Arrow is also very, very great for being a direct data transport in memory for other storage formats like Parquet and for other things like that. So I really do see Arrow continuing to grow in use and in features and performance, and just being the go-to, like taking things over, just like Spark is used by so many people. It's like Pandas is the go-to for data science. I see Arrow heading that way.
Awesome. Now, one final question. This is for both of you. I believe you both are presenting at an upcoming subsurface meetup that's on Arrow. What will each of you be presenting about? Matt, let's start with you.
So I'm going to be presenting on basically describing the Arrow format and the use cases. So like a lot of what we talked about in the interview questions so far, like, if you're wanting a bit more in depth of what use cases does Arrow really benefit, and what use cases are, really supercharged by utilizing Arrow, and how do you get that started, and understanding the format. That's what I'm talking about.
Jason?
Yeah, so building on top of what Matt's going to talk about there, certainly in the format and why it's great for processing in these use cases. I'll then kind of take it a step, build on top of that, and then look at the other side of that coin, as I mentioned before, with the transport, right? So why is it good for transport? What problems does it solve? Like, why do anything? And then we'll talk about Arrow Flight SQL, and really the problems that each of them solves, and then how it builds on top of each other, as well as we'll also talk about actually the capability of a universal JDBC and ODBC driver. So you can just have a single one. You don't need to have, like, you ever pulled up Tableau and you have just a wall of drivers and connectors. You won't need that anymore. You can actually just use one, which is pretty cool, and it actually builds on top of Arrow Flight SQL. So we'll talk about that, as well as when considerations when you would use which, and kind of best practices around that as well.
Okay, very awesome. Well, thank you very much to both of you for your time today. As you've all heard, Apache Arrow is an exciting and disruptive project. If you want to learn more about how to adopt Apache Arrow to transform your data engineering and analytics, pick up a copy of In-Memory Analytics with Apache Arrow. Perform fast and efficient data analytics on both flat and hierarchical structured data, which is available on Amazon today.